Hello and welcome to this, my video where I am reflecting on my time in Auschwitz. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Gordon. I am training for ordination with Lindisfarne College of Theology. I've just finished my second year of training and in September I'll start my final year. I went to Auschwitz with college this year. We spent Holy Week there. That's the week before Easter. And college likes to put on what they call Easter schools. We train people for both ordained and lay ministry at college. But every year all the ordinands go away for a week along with others. So this year we had some Lindisfarne alumni. We had some of our readers come along with us as well. And we went to Auschwitz. Next year we will be going off to the Holy Land, and the year after, if the programme stays the same, students will be going off to Northern Ireland to the Corrymeela community, where they will be looking at how they have helped to bring people together across the divide there. So what is the purpose of this video? This video is of a talk I did last night in my parish church. So what we're going to be doing is, first of all, we're going to look at what actually happened at Auschwitz during the Holocaust. I don't know how much people know, so it's always a good idea to assume that people don't know much, and so we'll have a look at what happened. Then we'll reflect on my experiences of Auschwitz, some of the stuff that has been going on in my head since I got back. Then we will ask the question, how do we actually remember what happened there? The Christian faith is a faith of remembrance. When Jesus had his Last Supper with his friends, he didn't give them a great big long list of things to believe. He gave them a meal and he gave them a commandment: remember. And then at the end, if you would like to find out more about things, then I will recommend a few things that I have found useful, that other people have found useful as well. As I said, I am a student of Lindisfarne College of Theology, and if you would like to, if you are able to, I will post a link in the description for this video for a link to donations to our student bursary fund. We don't just train people to be vicars, we train them to be lay readers, pastoral assistants. I think we still do people to conduct funerals. We have people from all across the northeast, and the student bursary fund is there for students who are finding things financially a little bit difficult. So I will post a link to that. If you wish to, then please do donate. But I think we should start with a content warning. Some of the things that I talk about you might find distressing. Just to be aware of that. I'm not going to sugarcoat what happened, because I don't think that is appropriate to those who died, those who suffered. I think if we are to remember, then we have to remember exactly what happened. So, what actually did happen during the Holocaust? The first point I want to make is that it's important that we realise that Auschwitz was the culmination, not the beginning of the Holocaust. The Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers and crematoria and people behind barbed wire fences. What happened at Auschwitz and the other camps was, if you like, an evolution of what was happening. anti-Semitic thought, anti-Jewish thought was there at the very beginning of Nazi ideology, Nazi thinking. Germany had, of course, suffered defeat in World War I, to the shock of many within Germany. And then in the 1920s, they suffered hyperinflation. I'm sure some of you will have seen those pictures of people with wheelbarrows full of money as they go off to buy one loaf of bread. And into this mix of desperate economics and a sense of loss and betrayal, Hitler and the Nazis found an easy way to pump in their ideology. They had their narrative of betrayal. They pumped in their populist ideas. And they had that one idea. What was needed to sort everything out was a strong man who would sort out all those liberals, all those elites, all those foreigners who had dared to interfere with Germany. I think we've heard that quite recently in other countries. But the Jews were handy scapegoats for what the Nazis believed were society's ills. Jews were involved in finance. Jews were involved in the arts. They were involved in intellectual pursuits. They were involved in things like psychology and medicine. And so it's easy to portray them as being an elite, but also one that wasn't of Germany. They owed their allegiance to a higher being. And so German propaganda, Nazi propaganda, portrayed the Jews in this way. You can see the pictures there. You've got the one with the Jew behind the curtain, and that's opposed to their blaming Jews for what happened during the war. And then on the other side you have the Jew as the snake, as the worm, weaving its way throughout all of society. And this was an attempt, and a successful attempt, we have to acknowledge, to portray them as being almost subhuman, as vermin, as being all entirely other. It helped them, therefore, to, when it came to gradually take away Jewish rights and property, under the justification of cleansing Germany from undue outside influences. And then, of course, the ghettos were set up partly to, or so they claimed, to protect Jewish people from the rest of society. Those people, they hate you, so we'll put you in here to keep you safe. But also, so they said, to protect the rest of the population from Jewish people. Jewish people be crammed into their ghettos, hundreds of thousands into tiny areas, and inevitably you would get outbreaks of cholera and of typhus. And so then the authorities could turn around and say, look, all that disease, that's a Jew's fault. They spread disease. Not soon after the war, after Germany invaded places like Poland, as soon as the Wehrmacht, the German army, had taken control, what were known as the Einsatzgruppen, the terror squads, would roll in. These were parts of the SS, and their task was to spread terror, to kill those who were deemed to be undesirable, Jews, intellectuals, those who were LGB, Jehovah's Witnesses, Gypsies, Roma and Sinti. And the usual method was to shoot them. Sometimes they would hang them, but at Baba Yar, which is just outside Kyiv in Ukraine, on just one day between the 29th and the 30th of September 1941, 33,771 Jews were massacred. And that there on the screen is the memorial to what happened there. This massacre inevitably took its toll on those who were involved. Many took to drink. Many had psychological problems after that. And so it was a problem for the Nazi authorities. They had another problem as well, because to kill all those people, the usual method was to go along and shoot them one at a time with a machine gun. All those bullets would have been expensive. And so with that in mind, and with the welfare of those involved in mass murder, the Nazis decided they needed a more efficient solution to their crimes. And so a conference was called in Wannsee, this is the villa there, which is just outside Berlin, in January 1942, which was tasked to find a more efficient and less psychologically taxing, what they came to know as the final solution to the Jewish question. And that conference was attended by some quite high-ranking members of the SS, so Reinhard Heydrich, as well as Adolf Eichmann were present at the Wannsee conference. But also at this conference there were judges, there were diplomats, there were bureaucrats, all come together to find that solution. And the Wannsee conference served as an extension for orders that Heydrich had already received from Hermann Göring. And as out of what had gone on before and out of what was discussed at Wannsee, a network of both concentration and extermination camps grew up. There was even a concentration camp on the Channel Islands, on Alderney. We don't know what happened there, because the Channel Islands weren't liberated until after the fall of Nazi Germany, and so the occupiers had plenty of time to destroy the camp and destroy any evidence of what they did. But on the map there you can see right across Europe there were many both extermination camps and concentration camps. And some of those names you might be able to see and may recognise. So Westerbork there in the Netherlands was the transit camp for the Netherlands. Jews would be sent there before being shipped to other camps. That was the camp that the Frank family were sent to before being shipped all over. Into Germany you have Ravensbrück, Sachsenhausen, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Flossenbürg, where Dietrich Bonhoeffer died, and then down in the south, just outside of Munich, Dachau. Into the Czech Republic you have Theresienstadt, and then into Poland there was Plaszów. If you've seen Schindler's List, after the liquidation of the ghetto, when the Jews are sent to a concentration camp, which is run by Amon Goeth, played by Voldemort, Ralph Fiennes, that concentration camp is Plaszów. But also there are places which are concerned solely with killing. As brutal and as horrific as places like Dachau and Belsen and Ravensbrück were, they didn't have gas chambers. Their purpose was as a concentration and as a slave labour camp. They still had crematoria to dispose of the bodies, but killing was not their objective. But killing was the objective at places like Chelmno, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec and Auschwitz-Birkenau. Their sole purpose was to kill as many people as quickly as possible. The camp commandant of Auschwitz, seen there next to Heinrich Himmler, is Rudolf Höss. That picture was taken in July 1942. Höss has just received a promotion, and Himmler is there to give him this, but also to check that Höss and Auschwitz can cope with what is going to come along their way, because they are going to see a massive increase in people being sent to them. But it's important that we realise that Auschwitz was not just one camp. So just like there was a network of concentration camps and death camps all across Nazi-occupied territory, so Auschwitz was a network of camps. Auschwitz number 1, just outside the Polish city Auschwitz, was the original site. And then Auschwitz number 2, which was the largest site, that was the purpose-built death and concentration camp. Across to the right there you have Auschwitz number 3, or Monowitz. That was a slave labour camp that housed, as well as Jews, it housed prisoners of war, Soviet and Allied, and there were some British people held there. But also you can see there lots of different little camps mentioned. Just below Auschwitz-Birkenau, on the edge of the picture there is a small one called Haremzi. We visited that village. The camp that was there is no longer there, but that was a fish farm which was overseen by an SS sergeant and corporal, and that, along with other camps, was there to provide food and supplies to the other camps. On the screen there is that famous image of the gate going into Auschwitz number 1. If you have seen any of the X-Men films, you may recognize this. This is where Eric Lenscher, who goes on to become Magneto, first discovers that he has his power. But Auschwitz number 1 wasn't built by the Nazis. It was originally a camp for Polish migrant workers before being taken over by the Polish army as a barracks. It was first used by the Nazis to intern intellectuals some 9 months after the war started on June the 14th, 1940. And the way that they rounded up these Nazis, they invited them, the intellectuals, they were all invited to a conference. Then the Nazis walked in and arrested them all. They were then shipped to Auschwitz. By August 1944, it held about 16,000 prisoners in something that's about a mile square. But it was also the home to Rudolf Höss and his family. They had a villa just outside the camp fence. It also had home to the main SS garrison. There was also administration blocks there and work blocks as well. It was at Auschwitz number 1 that the first experiments with gas were used at Auschwitz. At other camps, such as Treblinka and Sobibor, they didn't use the same gas that they used in Auschwitz. At those camps, they primarily used something like a diesel engine to pump fumes into the gas chamber. But at Auschwitz number 1, they started to experiment with something called Zyklon B. Zyklon B is an insecticide. They used it also to fumigate people's clothes after they had been seized when people were sent to the camp. And the first experiments were not on Jews but on Polish prisoners. Block 11 was the punishment block, and in the courtyard many people were shot against what's known as the Wall of Death. But also in the basement people were starved to death. That's where Maximilian Kolbe was sent for his death. And in that basement, that's where they first experimented with using Zyklon B to gas people. After a while, they decided to convert what was the morgue into a gas chamber because it was easier for them to use rather than keep having to get people out of the basement so they could convert it to use for gas. That gas chamber is still there. You can still visit it, but in 1943 it was converted into an air raid shelter. They kept the crematorium because they still needed to dispose of bodies, but it was no longer used as a gas chamber. Interestingly, Rudolf Höss was executed just outside the gas chamber. From where he was executed, he could see his old villa as well as the entrance to the gas chamber and the crematoria, and he was hanged there on the 16th of April 1947. On the screen there is a picture of what is known as the Gate of Death, the entrance to Auschwitz II, Auschwitz-Birkenau. That's part of a picture I took whilst I was there, which I shared on my Instagram, and it was picked up by the Auschwitz Instagram account and said, "Can we share this?" And I said, "Yes, feel free." It was the largest camp in the complex. It was a purpose-built death and concentration camp. It was originally built by Soviet prisoners of war, and construction started in 1941. The first gas chambers were operational by March 1942. In the middle of 1942, the construction of 4 large gas chambers and crematoria was started. Originally, the idea was that all the bodies would be burnt. But on his visit in July of 1942, Himmler watched some Jews being gassed, and he ordered that the bodies would not be buried, instead they would be burnt and the ashes used for fertilizer. Those who were deported to Auschwitz would arrive at Birkenau, and those who were fit for work would be selected, and those would be sent to either other camps or work in Birkenau. Those who were deemed unfit for work would be sent straight to the gas chamber. Until the summer of 1944, this selection took place about 2 kilometres outside the camp, but after May-June 1944 it took place within the camp, simply because of the large numbers of Jews and being sent from Hungary. Often there would be 5 trains a day with people crammed into the cattle trucks. For those who were deemed fit for work, there were a number of jobs that they would be sent to. Some would be sent to work in cobblers or as tailors, mending and sorting through clothes. Others would be sent to work in what was known as Canada. That was where they would be tasked with sorting through the belongings of those who had been sent there, so that what was there could be sent off and sold for the proceeds there given to the Nazi authorities. It was known as Canada because it was seen as a land of plenty. The idea at the time was Canada was this land of plenty. Other people were sent to work on the various farms. They could be sent to work in mines and quarries. Some were selected for prostitution, and some were selected for what was known as the Sonderkommando. I'll talk a little bit more about the Sonderkommando in a second. Those who were selected for work, after they had been taken away from everyone else, they were told that they were at the end. The only way that they would be leaving the camp would be through the chimneys of the crematoria. It was made very clear to them what their ultimate end was. For those, on the screen there is a picture of, that's the only part of this collection of the only known pictures of a selection taking place. And these pictures were taken in May-June of 1944, and the originals are at Yad Vashem, which is the International Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. As you can see there are a lot of people getting off the trains within the camp. And the trains would pull into the camp and people would get off. After everyone had got off, they would be sorted initially into men and women. And from there, a further selection would take place. So those who were deemed fit for work would go to one side. Those who had children, so women who had children under the age of 13, those who were deemed too old for work, those who had an obvious disability or impairment would be sent off to one side as well. One of the hardest things for me when I was in Auschwitz was the realization of which side I would have been sent to. I walk with a walking stick at the moment, and so I know that I would not have been selected for work. But if you look at the picture there, one of the things that our guide when we were there was keen to stress was that there is no panic in people's faces. There is no sense of fear. With so many people getting off the train at once, with a need to have things as efficient as possible, having panic and fear and the possibility of a riot was not in the best interests of the German authorities. And so they tried to keep it as calm as possible. So those who weren't selected for work were told, don't worry, we're going to take you now for a shower. You will see your loved ones in a while. Everyone was told to take their belongings with them because they were told you will need them. It also made it easier for the camp authorities to sort everything out after people had been killed. People would be taken from the train to the gas chambers. They wouldn't go straight into the gas chamber. First of all, they would be taken into an undressing room. There was no segregation. Everyone was told, go and strip, you're going to go for your shower. There were hooks on the wall with numbers, and they were all told, remember your number, you'll need to remember it to get your belongings afterwards, and tie your shoes together to keep them together. Once everyone had been stripped, they would be taken into the gas chamber. There on the screen is a picture of what remains of the gas chamber in Auschwitz I. Once everyone was in, The door behind them would be closed. A member of the SS would open a hatch either on the wall or on the roof, and the Zyklon B pellets would be poured in. The moisture from people's breath would react with the pellets to form the gas. After people had stopped screaming, they would wait maybe another 10 minutes, and then the room would be vented and the Sonderkommando would go to work. It was their job to remove the bodies from the gas chamber. People's heads would then be shaved, with the hair being sent off for various uses. They would also have to check various body bit parts and for any smuggled jewellery or valuable belongings. A team of dentists would check people's mouths for gold teeth and remove them. And then the bodies would be put on a lift and then taken to the crematoria. From getting off the train to being burned would maybe take just over an hour. I think at this time we keep a moment of silence and stillness as we remember those who died. Perhaps the most common question is, why did people do this? What drove them to commit this horrific crime? I think it's important that we remember that all of those who were involved in the Holocaust were people just like me and just like you. The SS had families. They had wives, they had girlfriends. Some of them had families living nearby. That picture on the screen, if you were to see it and they were wearing British or American uniforms, you would think it's just people having a good time. If you were to see it, people in the same pose today whilst on holiday, you'd think, oh, that's just people having a good time. But every single one of those in that picture worked at Auschwitz. Every single one of those knew exactly and was involved in what was going on. Someone sat down with a pen, a pencil, a bit of paper, a ruler and a set square and purposefully designed Auschwitz-Birkenau. Someone sat down with a pencil and paper and purposefully designed the gas chambers and the crematoria. During his trial, or part one of it, or when he was giving evidence at the Nuremberg trials, Rudolf Höss was asked the question, when you were doing what you did you think it was wrong? And he gave the answer, something along the lines of, not at the time. To which the lawyer asked, but what about now? And he answered, now I'm not so sure. it can be easy to develop a binary view of good and evil, usually with us on the good and someone else on the bad, the evil. But I can well imagine myself being in a situation where I am so hungry that I steal to eat. I can imagine driving my car down the road and becoming distracted by something or losing concentration for a second and hitting something or someone. Yes, I can't imagine myself purposely killing someone. But if those people in that picture could be driven to do the most horrific crimes, and they're just as human as you or I, then surely, given similar circumstances, similar pressures, similar warped ideologies and propaganda, surely that I am just as capable as them of doing it. I'm very much of the opinion that if someone has an easy answer to the questions of good and evil, then they either haven't understood the question or the answer is wrong. These things are very, very complicated. It makes it difficult for us as Christians because we preach a gospel of forgiveness. Just before he died, Rudolf Hess sought confession from a Catholic priest, and afterwards he received Holy Communion, which means that the priest offered absolution. He told Hus that his sins were forgiven. I'm not sure that many of us would find that easy to understand. Obviously, we don't know what was said in that confession. The seal of the confession is absolute. And even if it wasn't, both Hus and the priest are now long dead. But that's the hard bits of the Christian faith. It's not just a question of being nice to people. It's how do we reconcile that forgiveness with what happened at Auschwitz. And some of us, after we came back, we had a sit down and we had a talk about things, and we asked that question, how could people do what they did? And some members of the college reached for Bible passages such as this one, from Ephesians 6, where St. Paul writes, "For our struggle is not against blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." Of course, there is also that image of the great battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness within the book of Revelation. Personally, this makes me feel very uncomfortable. To be honest, it feels like if we accept something like that, it's letting people off the hook. It's taking away their agency, their human capacity to act freely. At the Nuremberg trials, it was made very clear to those who were standing trial that the defense or excuse of "I was just following orders" was not a valid or an acceptable one. But yet, that's the one that we had from the very beginning. in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 3, after Adam and Eve have eaten of the tree, and God finds them hiding in the garden. And he asks what's happened. And Adam says, "Oh, it wasn't me, it was that woman you gave me. She gave me the fruit and I ate of it." And the woman turns around and says, "Oh, it wasn't me. It was the serpent. He told me to eat." It's never their fault, always someone else's fault. But we have to reconcile our scriptures to what happens in our everyday lives. Part of the trial of Jesus in Matthew 27, the crowd are said to have called out to Pilate when talking about Jesus, "May his blood be on us and on our children." And this was used as an excuse for centuries and millennia to persecute Jews, for pogroms and massacres, because you take that, then the Jews were the killers of Christ. But there are also passages that we don't read in church. They're not part of our Sunday lectionary, such as this one from John chapter 8, where Jesus is talking to a group who John just calls the Jews. He says, "Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot accept my word. You are from your father the devil, and you choose to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. Whoever is from God hears the words of God. The reason you do not hear from them is that you are not from God." Now, this is a passage that we looked at in our New Testament module this year at college, because it is a difficult one for us to get our heads around. And we had many different ideas going around. Was Jesus talking about all of the Jews, or was he talking to just the religious authorities, or was it just a small group that he was arguing with? Whichever one you pick, we have to acknowledge that it can stand as the basis for anti-Semitism. Calling a group children of the devil, it's not exactly gentle Jesus, meek and mild. But they're also within our Christian theology, some of the great heroes of the church. There are some deeply troubling passages. One of the great heroes of the Eastern churches, the Greek Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, was a man called John Chrysostom. John Chrysostom was a priest, and he was known as a gifted orator. Chrysostom means golden-mouthed. But one of his homilies that we have is known as Against the Jews. And in it he says this: "Another prophet hinted at this when he said, 'Israel is as obstinate as a stubborn heifer.' And still another called the Jews an untamed calf. Although such beasts are unfit for work, they are fit for killing. And this is what happened to the Jews. Whilst they were making themselves unfit for work, they grew fit for slaughter." The homily is quite long, and even in context, that passage is not any easier to get your head around, to justify. That is just one passage from a great diatribe against Jews within his society. And another hero for many was Martin Luther. And yet in 1543, the great hero of Protestantism published what is now known as On Jews and Their Lies. And it's because of this that the Nazis felt no qualms about putting him in front of a Nazi flag. We have to be aware that within the Christian tradition there are some deeply, deeply dark and troubling passages. Not everything is as if we would like them. But here in the 21st century, things aren't all rosy either. We are still subject to propaganda. The Daily Mail. When I write an essay for college, I have to reference what I say. So if I make a claim, I have to tell whoever is reading it where I got the information for that claim from. And my qualification at the end of it is given by Durham University. And so I have to abide by Durham University's standards. I can use virtually anything except Wikipedia. Wikipedia works by the principle that anyone can edit the entries that you find there. And Wikipedia will accept virtually any and every source to back up your claim. What they will not accept, however, is a claim written in the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail, according to Wikipedia, is an untrustworthy source, and yet it remains one of the most popular newspapers in the UK. And these are just some of the front pages. There are hundreds more, probably thousands more. You might be able to see some of them. Calais in crisis over UK-bound migrants. More foreign convicts win right to stay. Teachers battle to cope with influx of migrants. Blunkett, migrants really are swamping parts of the UK. 4 in 5 new nurses on NHS wards are foreign. And of course the all-time favourite, that railing against the so-called out-of-touch judges, the elites who decided that the government couldn't do exactly what they wanted and must obey the law. Enemies of the people. This is what is being consumed in thousands and millions of homes every day. There was a study done in the United States where people who normally watch Fox News, which was the favoured news station of Donald Trump and his particular brand of far-right politics, they were paid not to watch Fox News for a month, and they were instead paid to watch another news network such as CNN or MSNBC, and then at the end of that month they would take part in a study to see if their views had changed, how they were feeling. The vast majority of people felt calmer. They didn't feel that there was a threat around every corner. They actually knew more about what was going on in the country and around the world. After they'd stopped being paid, however, most of them went back to Fox News because it felt safe for them. It's where they felt understood. And the novelist Terry Pratchett had a comment to make. He said, people don't want news. What they want to read is not Postman Bites Dog. They want to read that Dog Bites Postman. They don't want news, they want olds. Essentially what he's saying, that people want to read and consume media that reinforces their point of view on the world. And I think we're all guilty of that. The news that we consume will often reflect our politics, our ideologies. But whilst we were in Auschwitz, we met a Franciscan friar, Friar Mark, and one of our group asked him, where was God in Auschwitz? Now, when faced with that question, many people will say, oh, God was in all those who died in the gas chambers, those who were shot, those who were starved and beaten. But Friar Mark had a different perspective on it. He said, it's not where was God, but how was man so far away from God that he couldn't hear him? It's not where was God, but how was man so far away from God that he couldn't hear him? The Holocaust happened because we drifted so far away from God that we either couldn't or wouldn't hear him. The Holocaust happened because of the poison that was dripped into millions and millions of ears, just as Wormtongue did to Theoden in Lord of the Rings. The Holocaust happened because millions and millions of people sat back and decided it had nothing to do with them. Not my problem. It's too far away. I am not Jewish. I am not socialist. I'm not a Jehovah's Witness or a gypsy. I'm not LGBT. Nothing to do with me. And the way that is working in my mind at the moment is seeing in track ballast a metaphor for how the Holocaust happened. The Holocaust couldn't have happened without railways. If you think about the sheer logistics that would have been involved to transport thousands and thousands of people from Westerbork or from Budapest by road to Auschwitz, it would be logistically impossible. But with trains, it's relatively easy. But train tracks can't work, especially in Europe, without track ballast. And track ballast are all those stones that you see between the train tracks. Ballast is there to help create a sound foundation for the track. It helps water drain away so the track doesn't become flooded. It stops weeds growing up and disrupting points and what have you. And each bit of track ballast is a tiny stone. A 1,000,001 tiny stones coming together to make something work. Just as 1,000,001 people decided that the Holocaust was nothing to do with them, that it was too far away, that they could just turn their backs on it and ignore it. 1,000,001 people did nothing, and so 6 million Jews died. And we still do nothing today. People doing nothing led to Rwanda, Srebrenica, Darfur, the Uyghur Muslims in China. One of the guides to Auschwitz, Pavel Savicki, says this: "Sometimes I think that when they leave a candle or a stone, or they put the flower, and they go back to their lives, they think, our job is done. We remembered." But people should look at this place and think about our moral responsibility. This is not an anthropological discovery of, oh, people 75 years ago were able to do something like this. And we're surprised they still are able to do it. So why do people actually visit Auschwitz? If you ever get the opportunity, I would encourage you to visit Auschwitz. It has left a lasting impression on me. It has sometimes been something that's fried my mind, but also has been something that has been deeply, deeply beneficial. If you go as part of a regular tour, then the tours around the site maybe takes an hour and a half, 2 hours. We had a wonderful tour guide, Lydia, and we got a full academic tour, which was 4 hours in Birkenau and 4 hours in Auschwitz #1. My knees could not cope with walking around Auschwitz-Birkenau for 2 hours. So for 4 hours, sorry. There were no benches to sit down on. And so for part of it, I left the tour and went and sat outside on one of the benches. And whilst I was doing this, I was able to people watch. So watching people going about whatever they think is normal is always interesting. And it's interesting to think why people were there. Some came purely as tourists. This was just the latest stop on their tour around Europe. So they were in Krakow yesterday, they're in Auschwitz today, tomorrow they may be in Wrocław, and then the day after Berlin, and then the day after somewhere like Amsterdam. Some were there on school trips. I saw more than one bored-looking teenager waiting to be dragged round by a teacher. Some were there to pay their respects. So I saw an Orthodox Jewish gentleman walking down the train tracks with 2 children. I'm assuming that they were his sons, there to pay their respects to those who had died and remember what had happened. Others were a mixture. Some were there to do all of them. And there were many dressed like this lady here. Israeli students draped in Israeli flags, a sign of defiance almost at the Nazis. You tried to kill us, you tried to wipe us from this earth, but we're still here, throwing up as many fingers as they could to the Nazis. Israel did send groups of students from Israel to Poland to learn about the Holocaust. But they also, as part of these trips, not just to learn about what had happened, but also to somehow instill some sense of patriotism in their young people. Each day for these young people is tightly choreographed, and it ends with the singing of the Israeli national anthem. There are many reports of what happens on these trips. Young people often report being forced to show emotion or appropriate levels of grief whilst on a grand tour of the Holocaust in Poland, as they travel from Auschwitz to Treblinka to the Warsaw Ghetto, and they are given little or no time to think or process what is going on. And inevitably, this does lead to mental stress and in some cases mental breakdown. I was reading of a couple who was sent home after they were found dancing naked in Majdanek. The stress had got too much to them. But there is a problem for these groups. The Polish government have enacted a law which states that despite what some survivors may tell you, the Poles were entirely innocent of what happened. They never collaborated, they were never anti-Semitic. And undoubtedly there were many, many thousands and millions of Poles who resisted the authorities. They sheltered Jews. There were some Polish diplomats who gave Jews false passports to get them out of the country. But there are also tales of Jews being spat at as they were put into the ghetto. Many Poles being glad that the Jews were taken away, celebrating almost. But they're not allowed to be taught that in Poland. And I think how we remember is important. And hearing the testimony, the stories of the survivors is vital to understanding what went on and to remembering what happened. One morning we went to Haramza, that place where they used to have the fish farm. The camp is no longer there, but what there is this magnificent church which is part of a Franciscan friary. That's where we met Friar Mark. And inside this church there is a memorial to all the religious who died, the monks and the nuns and the friars who died during the Holocaust. And underneath this church, in its basement, is something quite spectacular. Underneath this church is what if you went to somewhere like the Baltic or Tate, it would be called an art installation. It was the artwork of someone called Marian Kowodje, and he was a Pole who was sent to Auschwitz. He was one of the first Polish people to be sent to Auschwitz. He was given the number 432, and he survived the war. After the war he went to Gdansk, where he worked in theatres designing sets and backdrops for operas and plays. One day he had a stroke, and after his stroke he had an urge to draw what had happened, after never even speaking about what had happened. And so he sat with a pencil and just drew, and in the basement it is full of his drawings, his experiences of life within Auschwitz. It's something that needs to be seen to be believed. I will post a link to a video that I found that goes around the whole exhibition. But one of the most striking images that I saw was this one. It's Jesus supporting Kowodje as he is. They are both tied to a whipping post, and Jesus is there supporting him. But Jesus isn't wearing the traditional crown of thorns. He's wearing a crown of barbed wire, symbolic of what is going on in what is constraining people within the camps. And whilst he was in Auschwitz, he met Maximilian Kolbe. And Maximilian Kolbe features throughout all of his artwork as well. And as part of the installation, he recreated Maximilian Kolbe's death cell. And in place of the door, there is a sheet of perspex with a hole cut in it. And if you look through the hole, it frames Father Maximilian as he is dying, and he is being supported not by Jesus but by Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary. You could walk around the exhibition, the installation, hundreds of thousands of times. At each time you would see something different. It is a unique testimonial to a horror which unfortunately is far from now unique. And it is important that we do remember that horror, because many, we have to acknowledge, choose to believe the lies that it never happened. So the so-called historian David Irving has been convicted in court for peddling the myth that the Holocaust never happened. Some people around the world are even taught in school that it never happened. So my brother-in-law was raised in Iran, and it's not until he came to the UK that he learned that the Holocaust actually happened. It's easy to understand why people find it hard to believe that it happened. It's estimated 1.5 million people died at Auschwitz, and that's hard to get your head around. But it's not until you visit the place that you realise how big it is. So in the picture there is at the end of the rail tracks, and right in the distance, very, very faintly, you might be able to make out the entrance to the camp, that gate of death. If you were to turn round from there, you would find a massive, weird-shaped memorial to those who died at Auschwitz. And behind that memorial, the camp goes on just as far. It also stretches off at least a mile to the left and to the right. It is a massive, massive space. And once you visit it, then you can start to get your head around how 1.5 million people died there. And so again, I would urge those of you who are able, please do visit. It is emotional, but it is so well worthwhile. But we don't have to go to Auschwitz to remember those who died. Every year on January the 27th is Holocaust Memorial Day. That is the day when Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviet Red Army. Each year has a different theme. You can find all the stuff for Holocaust Memorial Day on their website. Next year's theme has been announced, and it is called Ordinary People. But Holocaust Memorial Day also helps us to remember all those other genocides, Darfur, Rwanda, Srebrenica, but also allows hidden stories to be told. Until this year, I had no idea who this woman was. I'd never heard of her. This woman is Jane Hanning. Jane Hanning was born in Dunsker in Dumfriesshire, and she went to Budapest to work as a missionary in a school for Jewish and Christian girls. When war broke out, her sending church urged her to come back to be safe, but she refused. On the 25th of April 1944, Jane was arrested by the Gestapo and given a long list of charges, including things such as working with Jews and listening to the BBC. She was sent to Auschwitz on the 15th of May and was selected for work, and she was tattooed with the number 79467. She died of starvation on the 17th of July 1944, and that is the day when the Scottish Episcopal Church commemorates her in their calendar. Jane was a deeply brave woman. I'm sure in similar circumstances, many of us would have been on the first plane or train back home when asked to by our sending churches if we were in a similar situation. She chose to stand by the girls in her care, and she paid that ultimate sacrifice for it. There is a debate that goes on about how much we should tell our children about what happened. Some survivors and survivors groups think that it should start in kindergarten. Personally, I think that's a little bit young to be explaining about gas chambers and executions to children. I think at that age you can start to teach them about respect and love of those who are different. But beyond that, I'm not sure how much they would take in and how much use it would be. But proper education is vital. But unfortunately, some of the materials that are used in our schools are problematic. This is a popular book, The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. My wife is a teacher. Part of her work every year is to teach about the Holocaust. If she had her way, The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas would be banned. It would be burnt, even though burning books is a little bit problematic. It would never ever be used within an educational context because it is a deeply, deeply problematic book. If you've never read it, I'm going to spoil it for you now, and I'm not ashamed of that. So The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas centres around two boys. One is the son of the German commandant of the camp. The other is a Jewish boy who's living in the camp. The Jewish boy is found one day playing by the Nazi commandant's son by the fence that separates them, and somehow they strike up a friendship. One day the German commandant's son somehow manages to get into the camp, where he is caught up in a selection for the gas chambers. Somehow he is selected to be sent to the gas chamber. He is killed, and his mother and father are frantically searching for him. This book is problematic for a few reasons. Look at the history first. First of all, the son of the commandant would have known exactly who this boy was. he would have known exactly what was happening at the camp. The boy would not have been given pyjamas because he was under the age of 13, so he would have been sent straight from the train to the gas chamber. Even if he had lied about his age and been selected for work, if he had been found playing by the fence, he would have been beaten or shot. But the book is also problematic in what it espouses. The deaths of the hundreds and thousands and millions of Jews are incidental to the story. The death of that one solitary child of a Nazi is what we're supposed to feel sorrow for. The deaths of the Jews are treated as window dressing, as incidental, but we're supposed to feel sympathy and sorrow towards the person running the camp. And that is why my wife would have it banned and burned. But there are some other materials out there that are worth exploring. The first one is Elie Wiesel's book Night. I read this before I went off to Auschwitz. It's about his experiences there and is well worth reading. Also is Schindler's List, the book, and you watch the film as well. These are based on the accounts of Holocaust survivors. Thomas Kennelly wrote the book after coming into contact with one after he went into a shop to buy something and met a survivor. So it was based on their recollections. I don't normally recommend books I haven't read, but David Baddiel's book Jews Don't Count has had some very good reviews, and I've also heard him talk about it on a number of occasions. It's an account of anti-Semitism today and where it comes from, and in it he makes the point that even though he is an atheist, because his family are Jewish, he would have been sent to Auschwitz anyway. I was talking to my wife last night, and I didn't know that because he has Jewish heritage, David Beckham would have been sent to Auschwitz as well. And those of you who prefer graphic novels, then there is also Art Spiegelman's brilliant book Mouse. It's concerned with his father's experiences during the war and his experiences in Auschwitz, but it also deals with the aftermath, his life after liberation when they moved to the United States, how it continues to affect his father, and also how it affects him and his family as well. Well worth looking at. Those of you who prefer looking at stuff online, the Auschwitz Museum website has tons and tons of information about anything you could wish to look at. They also have a really good podcast, and they have really good social media as well. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, give them follows on there. One of the things that they often do is every day they will have at least one picture of someone who was sent to Auschwitz. It'll tell you where they were born. If they have the information, it will tell you what they did, the day they arrived in Auschwitz, and it also tell you their fate. Occasionally, very occasionally, it will tell you that they survived and what they went on to do. There's also the Holocaust Memorial Day website. Lots of materials on there to help remember what happened. And there is the Yad Vashem website, where if you want to see lots and lots of really good artifacts, they are all on there. If you would like to watch some TV shows, there are a couple. The Matt Lucas edition of Who Do You Think You Are, where he traces his family throughout the war and discovers a link to Anne Frank. And also Robert Rinder, Judge Rinder, a two-part series, My Family, the Holocaust and Me. So it explores his family's links to what happened in the Holocaust, also the links of other families within the UK, what happened to them. Both of those are on iPlayer. And so I thought that we would end with the prayer for Holocaust Memorial Day. Eternal God, you hold all of our days in your hands. On this day we come before you to remember the victims of the Holocaust. We lament the loss of the 6 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, the millions of other victims of Nazi persecution and victims of other genocides. May our minds be clear and attentive to their memory, and our hearts be moved to bear witness to their lives. Help us to remember and recognize the sanctity of each human life, that all people are made in your image. One day, we pray that genocide and hatred will be no more, and that love will triumph over evil. In our prayers and in our actions, help us to show this love in the world today. Amen. So thank you for watching this video. Please do like and share it, and I hope that you have found it useful. I hope that it's provoked some thoughts, and it has been inspiring. And I don't want to say that you've enjoyed it, but it has been useful in you in whatever way.